Tell me to stop." The words came so quietly that Suha thought she had imagined them. She sat on the edge of a bed that was not hers, in a room larger than the apartment where she had grown up, in a house owned by a man whose name people in Seoul spoke only after checking the door. Her wedding dress still pressed against her ribs. She had chosen none of it. Not the dress, not the date, not the man who now stood a few steps away with his jacket off and his sleeves turned back, watching her, the way careful people watch something that might break. Ryu Do-han was not supposed to be gentle. Everything she had heard in the 4 weeks since her father signed her away had promised the opposite. They said the Ryu family owned half the harbor and most of the men who worked it. They said Do-han had taken the organization at 26 and had not lost a single thing since. They said he could empty a room simply by entering it. Her father had told her these things, not as warnings, but as instructions. "Do not embarrass me. Do not speak unless you are spoken to. You have ruined enough already. Let this be the one arrangement you do not destroy." So she had come to the wedding night, expecting to be used and then forgotten. She had folded that expectation around herself, like a second dress. It was easier to survive a thing you had already decided to endure. Instead, the most feared man in the city was standing across the room, asking her permission. "Say it," he said. "If you want me to leave, tell me to stop, and I will not come near you, not tonight, not any night. You will never have to explain yourself to me." Suha opened her mouth. This was the old failure, the one her father had named so many times that it had grown into her like a second spine. When people watched her and waited, her voice simply left her body. It had happened at her own engagement dinner, when a room of powerful strangers turned to hear the bride speak, and she produced only silence while her father's jaw went tight. It was happening now. Do-han did not fill the quiet. He did not step closer to use it. He only waited. And something in the waiting was so unlike everything she knew about men with power that her eyes began to sting. "I do not know you," she finally managed. The words came out cracked down the middle. "No," he agreed, "you do not." "Then why are you asking me anything at all?" For the first time he looked away from her, toward the dark window and the far lights of the city spread out below the hill. "Because a marriage that begins by taking," he said, "is only a longer word for what your father did to you. I have watched that kind of marriage from very close. I will not build another one." She did not know where to put kindness. She had no shelf inside her for it, so she sat with her hands knotted in the ruined silk of her lap and studied him instead. Because studying people was the one thing she had always been able to do even when her voice would not work. She saw the tiredness he hid. Well, she saw that he had not touched the wine on the table. She saw the way his eyes kept returning, again and again, not to her, but to the door, as though some part of him were listening far past the walls of the room. Then she heard it too. Somewhere deep in the house, down a corridor, she had not been shown. Someone was crying. Not a child, exactly. Something rawer than that. A sound with no words anywhere inside it, rising and breaking and rising again. Do-han was already moving. "Stay here," he said, and for the first time his voice carried the edge. "The whole city was afraid of. Whatever you hear tonight, do not leave this room." The door closed behind him. Suha sat alone in her wedding dress and listened to the most dangerous man in Seoul run toward the sound, instead of away from it, and understood that she had not married a man at all. She had married a house full of locked doors. And the loudest thing behind them was still screaming. No one came to explain the screaming. Suha did not sleep. She sat awake and listened until the sound thinned, and finally died somewhere near dawn. And when a woman with silver threaded through her hair arrived to dress her for the family breakfast, Suha asked what had happened in the night. The woman, whose name was Sunja, and who carried the household keys on a ring at her waist, went still for exactly one breath. Then she smoothed the collar of Suha's blouse and said, "In this house, we learn quickly Which questions belong to us? That one does not. Ask it again, and you will learn nothing, except how much silence a person can be given for an answer. The breakfast was held in a long gray room, with a table built for enemies who had agreed, for the morning, to eat together. Suha counted 11 faces before she stopped counting. Men who ran the harbor. Men who ran the harbor. A weathered older one named Jagil, who stood at Dohan's shoulder and watched the room the way a dog watches a tree line. And near the center, seated as though the chair had been carved for her, a young woman in pale winter colors who looked at Suha with the patient interest of a cat deciding whether a thing was worth the trouble. Her name, Suha would learn, was Bakyena. Her family had built ships for the Ryu organization for 2 generations. Everyone at that table had assumed, for years, that she would be the one to marry Dohan and fold the 2 houses into one. Everyone, except apparently Dohan. Yena lifted her cup. "We should welcome the bride," she said. Her voice was lovely and carried to every corner. "Tell us about yourself. Where does your family keep its business?" The room turned toward Suha. Every face, the old failure, rose in her throat like water in a flooding room. She knew what her father's business was. It was owing money to the people at this table. It was losing a printing company, and then a restaurant, and then the apartment, and signing a daughter over when there was nothing left to sign. She knew all of it, clearly and completely, and not one word of it would come out of her mouth. She sat in the silence and felt it become a spectacle. Somewhere under the table her hands had begun to shake. Yena smiled into the pause she had built. "Forgive me," she said gently. "I forgot. Your family does not keep its business. Your family sold it." She turned her lovely face toward Dohan. "I only wonder what a man buys when he buys a woman who cannot even tell a table her own name." A few of the men looked at their plates. One of them, a young one, made the beginning of a laugh and then thought better of it, because at the head of the table Dohan had set down his chopsticks. He did not raise his voice. Suha would come to understand that he never had to. He simply looked at Baek for a length of time that grew, second by second, into something the whole room could feel. And then he said, "My wife has told this table her name. You were speaking too loudly to hear it." The lovely color drained out of Yena's face. Suha had not, in fact, said anything at all. Everyone knew it, and that was the point. Dohan had handed her a truth that was not true, and dared the room to correct him, and no one did, because correcting him was not a thing that people at that table survived doing twice. "You will apologize to her," Dohan said, "before you leave my house." "I meant no harm," Yena said. Her voice had lost its music. "You meant a great deal of it," he answered. "That is why you will apologize." The rest of the meal passed in the careful quiet of people eating near a sleeping animal. When it ended, Yena stopped beside Suha's chair on her way out. Up close, her beauty had a blade in it. "Enjoy the wedding gifts," she said, low enough for only Suha to hear. "He is kind to broken things for exactly as long as they interest him. When you bore him, and you will remember that this house has a wing no bride is ever shown. And ask yourself what a man keeps in a place like that." Then she was gone, in a soft rush of expensive fabric. Suha sat very still. A wing no bride is ever shown. She thought of the screaming and the corridor she had not been walked down, and the way Dohan's eyes had kept sliding to the door the night before, as though the most important thing in his life were somewhere on the other side of it. That afternoon, alone, she went looking for it. She told herself she was only learning the house. The east corridor grew colder as she walked it, the good carpet giving way to bare polished wood, the framed photographs on the walls, thinning until there were none at all. At the end stood a set of double doors, and in front of the doors sat 2 men she recognized from the breakfast, and they rose when they saw her with an alarm that did not match the sight of one small woman in slippers. "You should not be here," the nearer one said. "Please, for your own sake, go back." And then, from behind the doors, so close it made her flinch, something struck the wood from the inside, and a voice that had no words in it began. once more to scream. The doors opened from the inside before the guards could stop her, and a man in a doctor's coat stumbled out, holding his forearm, and through the gap, Suha saw the room. It was large and almost empty, stripped the way a room is stripped when the people in charge have decided the person inside it cannot be trusted with objects. In the far corner, wedged into the angle of two walls with his knees drawn up and his back pressed hard against the plaster, was a boy, 15, perhaps 16. Thin, in the way that has nothing to do with food. He had Dohan's exact eyes, and every other part of him was somewhere else, entirely drowning. Two large men were closing on him with the slow, spread arms people use for something they intend to hold down. The doctor's bag lay open on the floor where he had dropped it. "He needs to be settled before he hurts himself," the doctor was saying to the guards. "Keep hold of him, both arms this time." The boy saw the men coming and made the sound again, and Suha finally understood that it was not rage. She had heard rage. She had grown up inside a house that ran on it. This was the other thing. The thing rage is often mistaken for by people who have never been truly afraid. Every part of the boy that could be read was begging. "Stop," Suha said. It came out of her without passing through the place where her voice usually failed. It came out clear. The guards actually stopped, more from surprise than obedience, and the doctor turned to her with an expression that said a great many things about small women who wandered into rooms that were not theirs. "This does not concern you," he said. "He is dangerous. He does not know us. He does not know you. There is nothing here that talking will fix. He knows you are afraid of him," Suha said. She was not looking at the doctor. She was looking at the boy, and she had crouched slowly to make herself smaller than everyone else in the room. "That is why he cannot stop. Every single person in here is braced to hold him down. He can feel it. You are all standing the way people stand, right before they hurt someone. I have treated him for 2 years." The doctor said. "Then in 2 years," Suha said quietly, "has holding him down ever once made him better?" The doctor had no answer, and the silence where his answer should have been was its own confession. She did not go to the boy. She understood, in her body, that going to him was the one thing that would finish this. Instead, she sat down on the bare floor several steps away, near the wall, and she folded her hands in her lap, and she made herself the least frightening thing in the room. She did not look into his eyes, because being stared at when you are cornered is a kind of violence all its own. She looked, instead, at the small space of floor between them, and she began, very softly, to speak to no one in particular about nothing at all. She told the empty air that the tea in this house was too weak. She told it that her slippers were the wrong size, and slapped the floor when she walked, and that she had been embarrassed about it all morning. She told it that she had not slept, and that she had been frightened too, all night. In a room she did not know, and that she understood exactly how it felt to be somewhere you had not chosen with people watching you to see what you would break. The boy's breathing was still ragged, but it had stopped climbing. She took the folded paper crane out of her cardigan pocket, the one she had made from a breakfast napkin, without quite knowing why, turning it in her fingers through the long, strange morning. She set it on the floor between them and did not push it toward him. "I am going to leave this here," she said. "Still to the air, still to no one. You do not have to take it. You do not have to do anything. Nobody in this room is going to make you do anything. That part is over." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the boy, whom 11 grown men were afraid of, whom 2 years of treatment had only taught to scream, unfolded one hand from around his knees, reached across the bare floor, and picked up the paper crane. And, behind Suha, from the open doorway, in a voice she had never once heard him use, Ryu Dohan said her name, as though the floor had just moved under him. No one in the room moved, scrayed. Ryu Dohan stood in the doorway and looked at his brother, who was holding a paper crane against his chest with both hands, the way a much younger child holds something he has decided belongs to him and no one else. The boy's breathing had slowed. The screaming was gone. In its place was a quiet, so unfamiliar that the two guards did not seem to know whether they were still permitted to stand the way they had been standing. Dr. Han Ji-seok recovered first. She walked in. Without permission, he said, cradling his forearm against his ribs. She interrupted a sedation that was already underway. If the boy had turned on her, I would not have answered for it. You should have her taken out, and the door made secure. Do-han did not seem to hear him. He crossed the room slowly, and Suha watched the boy for the flinching she expected. It did not come. Gaon looked up at his brother, and then, on purpose, looked back down at the crane, and turned it over once in his hands. How long he has been holding that, Do-han said. His voice was not steady. Since I set it down, Suha answered. A few minutes. He reached for it himself. I did not put it in his hands, and I did not go to him. I have not touched him at all. Do-han crouched a full body's length from his brother. Careful, she noticed, to stay outside the boy's reach rather than inside it, which was the opposite of what everyone else in the room had been doing. Gone, he said quietly. The boy did not look up, but his shoulders did not climb either, and from the way the guards glanced at one another, Suha understood that even this was new. Everyone out, Do-han said. The doctor began to object. He is not stable. He needs to be out, Do-han said again. And this time it was the voice from the wedding night. The one that ended conversations, and the room emptied of everyone except the doctor, who held his ground with the particular courage of a man protecting his own record. I have treated your brother for 2 years, Dr. Han said. If you let an untrained woman undo that work because she folded a napkin, you will regret it the first time he hurt someone, and there is no one qualified in the room. Suha expected Do-han to answer him. Instead, Do-han looked at her. What you need, he said. The question landed in her the way the one from the night before had. It was the second time in 2 days that this man had asked her what she needed instead of telling her what would happen, and she was beginning to suspect it was not a performance. Because performances grew tired, and his did not. She made herself think past the fear. I need the doctor to wait outside, she said. Not because he is wrong about everything, because your brother has learned that, when that man is in the room, something is about to be done to him. As long as he is here, Gaon will spend all of himself watching the door. I need no one to try to make him speak. I need no one to hold him, or move him, or decide he has had enough, and end it before he is ready. And I need you to understand that if I do this, I am not going to fix him this afternoon. I am not going to fix him at all. He is not broken, he is buried. Those are different problems, and they take different amounts of time. The doctor made a sound of disgust. Do-han ignored it. Buried under what? He said. Under everyone being certain they already know what he is, Suha said. For a long moment Do-han looked at her, and she could not read the look. And then he stood and told the doctor to wait in the corridor. And the doctor went. Though the set of his back promised the conversation was not finished. Then it was only the 3 of them. Suha did not do anything dramatic. She had learned a long time ago, in a small apartment with a dying mother and a furious father, that the most useful thing a person could offer someone who was drowning was to become a patch of dry ground and simply stay there. So she stayed. She talked, sometimes, about nothing. She folded another crane out of a sheet, torn from the doctor's abandoned notepad, and a third, and she lined them up on the floor between herself and the boy, without ever once offering them, and one by one, over the course of an hour that Do-han spent sitting silently against the far wall. At some point, she slid the notepad and the pen into the neutral space between them. She did not say what they were for. She did not ask him to use them. She only made them available, the way you leave a door open without standing in it, and then she went back to folding. It was nearly dark when Gaon picked up the pen. He did not write a word. He drew. His hand was clumsy with disuse, but the shape was unmistakable when it was done. It was a crane, caught mid-fold, half flat paper and half bird, held in the moment of becoming one thing out of another. He looked at it for a while. Then he turned the pad around slowly and pushed it across the floor toward her. And this time he was the one making something available. And she understood that she had just been handed the first thing this boy had chosen to say to another human being in a very long time. She heard Do-han get to his feet behind her. When she looked back, the most feared man in Seoul was standing with one hand pressed flat over his own mouth, and above it his eyes were wet, and he was doing nothing at all to hide it, because he had forgotten in that moment that anyone was there to see. He did not thank her. She would learn that he almost never said the ordinary things. Instead, he came and crouched again beside his brother and looked at the drawing for a long time. And then he said to Gon, in a voice stripped of everything the city feared, "That is very good." Gon did not look at him. But he did not take the drawing back either. Later, in the corridor, with the door shut softly behind them, Do-han stopped her with a single word. "Wait." She waited. He was quiet long enough that she thought he had changed his mind. Then he said, "No one has reached him since our mother died. Not the doctors. Not me." He looked at her as though she were a problem he had failed to budget for. "I need to understand what you did. And I need to know what you will want in return, because everyone wants something, and I would rather learn the price now than be surprised by it later." Suha thought of her father, who had taught her she was a thing with a price, and who had at last found a buyer. "I do not want anything," she said. "Everyone says that." "I am not everyone," she said. And she was as surprised as he was by how steady it came out. "I spent my whole life being told what I was worth by people who had already decided. I will not do it to your brother." Then she went to find her own room in a house she did not yet know, and behind her, she left a man who had spent his entire life pricing everything, standing alone in a cold corridor, unable for the first time in a long time to name the cost of what had just happened. By the third morning, the household had a new problem. And the problem was that Ryugaon would not eat unless Cha Suha was in the room. Sunja brought her the news with a face that was working hard to stay a servant's face and not entirely managing it. "The young master has refused 3 trays, she said. "He has done this before. The last time it lasted 6 days, and ended in a way I will not describe to you, because you strike me as a person who would then hear it in her sleep." She smoothed her apron. "He took nothing again this morning. But he keeps rising and going to the door and looking down the east corridor, toward the part of the house where they have put you." Suha was dressed and moving before she had finished deciding to be. She found Do-han already outside the double doors, and she saw in the half of a second before he arranged his face that he had not slept. The man whose name lowered voices across the harbor looked at his new wife in the cold corridor and did the thing she was beginning to understand cost him more than violence ever had. He asked, "Will you sit with him while he eats?" Do-han said, "I would not ask." He stopped and corrected himself, because he was precise even while he was coming apart. "That is a lie. I would ask. I am asking. He has taken food from no one in 3 days, and I have run out of the things that are mine to try." "I was already coming," Suha said. She sat with Gaon while a tray was brought, and she did not feed him, and she did not coax him, and she did not once look at the food as though it mattered whether he touched it, because she had learned young that the fastest way to make a frightened person refuse a thing is to need him to accept it. She folded a crane, she talked about the weak tea. And after a while, with no announcement at all, the boy picked up the spoon himself and ate, slowly, watching her the whole time, and in the doorway Do-han watched his brother eat the way other men watch the sunrise after a night they had not been certain they would live through. This became the shape of the days. She was called for meals. She was called when the nights went bad. Do-han, who had built an entire life around being the only person his brother would ever need, discovered that the person his brother needed was a woman his own household had bought to settle a debt. And Suha, could see what it did to him. The strange arithmetic of being grateful to and afraid of the same person, and she said nothing about it. Because there was nothing kind to say. Then, on the 6th day, Gan left the wing. She was in the small side garden where the winter camellias grew, the one place in the enormous house that felt as though it might forgive a person for being in it, when she heard the commotion begin somewhere behind her. Doors, raised voices, Yeagel's flat command to let him go. Do not grab him, let him go. And then the garden door opened, and Ryugan came out into the gray afternoon, thin and unsteady, blinking up at a sky he had not stood beneath in longer than anyone wanted to count, and he did not stop until he reached the bench where she sat. And then he sat down beside her, close but not touching, and let out a long breath, as though he had walked a great distance to set something down. The men who had followed him stopped at the edge of the garden, none of them willing to be the one to break whatever this was. Suha did not make it into an event. "Hello," she said, as though the boy came and found her every day. "It is cold. You should have a coat." She lifted her own from her shoulders and laid it on the bench in the space between them. Available, not offered, and after a moment he pulled it over his knees. That was where Dohan found them a few minutes later. He came through the door fast, saw his brother sitting in the open air beside her, and stopped as though he had walked into glass. Whatever he had run there braced to handle, it had not been this. He stood in the cold, with his hands loose at his sides, and Suha watched him rearrange every plan he had ever made about his brother's life, in real time, behind his eyes. He came over slowly, and lowered himself onto the grass in front of the bench, rather than sitting between them, so that he was below the boy's line of sight, so that he was the smallest of the three of them, and Suha thought, he learned that from watching me, and something turned over in her chest that she had no name for and did not want one. "I did not think he would come out here again," Dohan said. He was not really speaking to her, he was speaking to the camellias, and to the boy his brother used to be, and to whatever part of himself still lived in that older, warmer year. He used to like this garden. Gayan watched a bird move through the bare branches. "He still does," Suha said. Dohan looked at her, and for one unguarded moment, the most dangerous man in Seoul looked at his wife, the way a man looks at the first light he has seen at the end of a very long dark hall. Then a phone rang somewhere inside the house, and Jajil appeared at the door, with the expression of a man for whom the world beyond these walls had just remembered it existed, and the moment closed like a hand. Dohan rose and brushed the grass from his trousers, and became once more the man the city was afraid of. "I have to take this," he said. Then, quieter to her, "Will you stay with him?" "I will stay," she said. She did not know yet that it was the last easy afternoon they would be given for a long time. She only knew that the boy had come to find her, and the man had knelt on the wet grass, and somewhere out past the garden wall a telephone had begun the slow work of taking it all apart. The card arrived on a Tuesday, in a flat black envelope, delivered by Jagel, with the discomfort of a man sent to do something he did not understand. "The master says this is yours," Jagel said, "for the household, for yourself. For whatever a wife requires." He set it on the table as though it might go off. Suha looked at the black card, and did not touch it. "What does a wife require?" she asked. Jagel, who was 50 years old and had survived 3 decades in the harbor, by never answering questions of that kind, said, "I could not say," and left. That evening Dohan came to the small sitting room off the garden, where she had begun to spend her evenings because Gayan would sometimes drift in and sit on the floor, and he saw the black card lying on the table exactly where Jagel had left it. "You have not used it," he said. "No is the amount an insult." He said it without irony. In his world, an untouched gift was usually the opening of a negotiation. "It is a great deal of money," she said. "That is the problem with it. My father spent my whole life telling me what I cost. Then he found a man to pay it." She met his eyes. "I am not going to spend the rest of my life as a woman who is kept, even comfortably, even kindly. If I do something in this house worth being paid for, then pay and for the thing I did. Do not hand me a card and call it a marriage." Do-han was quiet. Then he picked the card back up and put it into his pocket, and she braced for the cold, for the withdrawal, for the lesson every man in her life had eventually taught her about the price of refusing him. Instead, he said, "All right. Tell me what the work is worth, and I will pay you for the work." And he sounded, if anything, more interested in her than he had been an hour before, which made no sense to her at all, until much later. She had been keeping a record without quite letting herself call it that. A folded page in her cardigan pocket, added to, in pencil, the morning's gown ate on his own, the nights he slept through, the afternoons he drew. And beside them the bad days, the ones that ended in screaming, and what had happened in the hours before each one. When she finally looked at the page as a whole, the pattern was so plain that she felt almost angry no one had found it until she remembered that no one had been looking at the boy. They had been looking at the danger. She brought the page to Do-han in his study, a room of dark wood and harbor maps where she had never been invited, and went, anyway. "Your brother has a bad day roughly every 8 days," she said, and set the page on his desk. She had learned, from the matter of the black card, that this man respected being spoken to plainly. Look at the dates of the bad ones. Now look at this. Dr. Han came to the house every 8th day. Every single episode in the past month happened within a few hours of one of his visits. Not before. After. Do-han studied the page. "He is meant to be treating him," he said slowly. "He is meant to be treating him," Suha agreed. "But every 8 days, a man your brother is terrified of walked into his room, tried to make him speak, examined him against his will, and reminded him, with a bag of instruments and everything it stood for, of the worst thing that ever happened to him. Then that man left and wrote down that the patient was unstable and required more of the same." She kept her voice level. "Gaon is not having episodes because he is sick. He is having them because, once every 8 days, someone frightened him on purpose and called it medicine." Do-han said nothing for a long time. When he looked up, there was something dangerous in his face. But for the first time since she had met him, it was not aimed anywhere near her. "You are certain?" "I am certain of what is on the page," she said. "I am not a doctor. But I would ask you the question a doctor should have asked 2 years ago. In 2 years of this treatment, has your brother had even one good day because of it?" He had not. They both knew it. Dr. Han Jiziak did not come back to the house. Suha did not ask what had been said to him. And Do-han did not offer, and she decided that some things about her husband's world were better left on their own side of a closed door. Something in the house eased after the doctor stopped coming. Do-han began appearing in the small sitting room in the evenings. At first, he came with a reason, always. A question about gown, a paper for her to sign. And he stood while he asked it and left once it was answered. Then the reasons grew thinner. Then he stopped bringing them at all. He would sit in the chair by the cold window with a stack of documents that he read twice. She noticed, whenever something worried him, and Gaon would drift in and fold cranes on the floor, and Suha would sit with her tea, and for an hour the most feared family in the city would simply exist in one room, quietly, like people who belonged to each other. She learned things. That he took his tea with nothing in it, and disliked anything sweet. That he removed his watch and laid it face down when he wanted, for a while, to stop being the man who was always counting. That he went very still whenever Gaon laughed, which was rare, as though he were trying to hold the sound without crushing it. He learned things, too. That she talked to herself when she believed no one could hear. That she saved the used tea leaves and steeped them a second time, because throwing things away still felt like a luxury she had not earned. That she flinched, very slightly, whenever a man lifted a hand near her face, even to push back his own hair, and that she hated herself for doing it. He never asked her about the flinch. She was grateful, and then, strangely, a little disappointed, and chose not to examine why. One evening he watched her set a cup of water on the floor, near where Gaon sat, not handing it to him, only leaving it, and he said, "You always do that. You put the thing down and step away. You never give it to him from your hand." "If I give it to him, he has to decide whether to take it from me," she said. "That is a great deal to ask of someone who spent 2 years being handed things he did not want. If I set it down and walk away, he only has to decide whether he wants water." She glanced at him. "It is easier to choose a thing when no one is watching you choose it." Dohan was quiet for a moment. "On our wedding night?" he said. "I told you to tell me to stop." "Yes. I have wondered since then whether you understood why." "I think I am beginning to," she said. "Say it," he said. It was the same word he had used that first night, and it did not sound like a command. "You do not want to be a man who takes," she said. "So you set the thing down, and you step back, and you let the other person decide whether to pick it up." She looked at the cup of water on the floor, and at the boy deciding whether to drink from it, and at the man who had knelt on wet grass to make himself smaller than his brother. "You and I care for frightened creatures in the same way," she said. "I only learned it sooner because I was one." Ryudo-han looked at his wife for a while across a room full of paper cranes, and said nothing at all, because there are things a certain kind of man cannot say and can only sit inside of. She let herself, in those weeks, feel something she had not trusted in years. Not happiness, she was too careful a person for that word, but the absence of dread, which for her had always been very nearly the same thing. It lasted until the morning Sunya came to find her in the garden with a strange tightness around her mouth. "There is a man at the gate asking for you," Sunya said. "He says that he is your father." She hesitated. In a way Suha had never seen the unflappable housekeeper hesitate before. "He says he has come to see how his investment is doing." And so, from the far side of a wall, she had allowed herself to believe was high enough. The voice that had lived inside her head for her entire life put on its coat and walked up to the gate in person. Her father was smaller than the voice he had left inside her. That was the first thing Suha noticed when Sunja showed Cha Manho into the receiving room, and it unsettled her, because for years the voice had been enormous. And here was the man it belonged to, in his good suit, gone shiny at the elbows, looking around a room worth more than everything he had ever owned with the hunger of a man tallying up what he might be owed. "Look at you," he said. He did not embrace her. He had never been a man for that. Married up at last. "I always told you that you would land somewhere, if only you could learn to keep your mouth shut and stay out of the way. It seems you finally learned how." The old thing happened at once. Her throat closed. Her hands, which were steady now for 8 hours a day beside a boy the whole house had feared, went cold and useless at the sight of one aging man in a shiny suit. "I hear the Ryu family is generous with its people," her father went on, walking a slow circle around the room, lifting a small jade cup from a shelf and turning it over to check the mark on the bottom. "I raised you. I fed you. I found you this marriage when there was nothing left. It would be a poor daughter who forgot that. A poor daughter who did not think of her old father. Now that she sleeps in a house like this." He set the cup down, not quite where it had been. "A small allowance, a word to your husband, that is all a grateful child would arrange." Suha opened her mouth. Nothing came. The voice in her head, his voice, the one that had narrated every failure of her life, said, "You see, you cannot even do this. You ruin everything. You always have." "I said," her father repeated, more sharply, "and that a grateful child would arrange it. Have you gone stupid as well as mute?" "That is enough." The words came from the doorway, quiet, and the temperature of the room dropped by 10 degrees. Ryudo-han stood there in shirt sleeves, and he was not looking at Suha. He was looking at her father with an attention so total and so cold that Shaman Ho took an involuntary step backward into the shelf, and the jade cup rocked. Dohan crossed the room without hurry. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "Your debt to my family was settled on the day of the wedding," he said, "in full. There is no allowance. There is no word to be had. You are a guest in my house for exactly as long as it takes my men to walk you to the gate." He paused. "And you will not come back, not to this house, and not to any place my wife happens to be. If I learn that you have written to her, or telephoned her, or spoken her name to another living person in a way that reaches her, we will have a very different conversation, and you will enjoy it far less than you are enjoying this one." Cha Manho's face worked. "You cannot. I am her father. You were her creditor," Do-han said. "You have been paid." Then he did the thing Suha did not expect. He turned to her and in front of her father in a voice gone gentle again, he said, "Unless you want something different. He is your father. This is your choice, not mine. Tell me what you want done, and it will be done." And there it was again. The thing he did. He had set the whole matter down on the floor between them, and stepped back, and left her to decide whether to pick it up. For a moment, the two voices fought inside her, the old one and the new one. The one that said, "Stay silent," and the one, small and unpracticed, that had learned to speak clearly in a stripped room to a frightened boy. She looked at her father, who had priced her, and sold her, and come back to collect the interest, and she found, to her own astonishment, that her voice was there when she reached for it. "I want him to go," she said. "And I do not want him to come back." Her father's face curdled. As Yegil and another man came to walk him out, he twisted in their grip to look at her one last time. "Enjoy it," he said, and the smile he gave her was the one that had shaped her whole childhood. "Enjoy it, while it lasts. A man like that does not keep a broken thing forever. When he is finished with you, do not come crying back to me." Then he was gone, and the receiving room was very quiet. Suha stood shaking. She had said the words. She had also heard the other ones, and they had gone straight to the place inside her, where they had always lived, and taken up residence as though they had never left. Do-han did not tell her that her father was wrong. She would remember that, afterward, as the moment she began to love him, though she did not know it yet. He did not offer comfort like a coin pressed into her hand. Instead, he sat down in one of the good chairs, and after a while, as though it cost him something, he said, "My father used to say a thing like that to my mother, that she should be grateful, that she had been given far more than she deserved and should be quiet and stay out of the way." Suha looked at him. She was married to him. "The way you were married to me," Do-han said, which is to say, she was not asked. He looked down at his own hands. "I was old enough to see what it did to her. My brother was not. He was very small." He turned the watch on his wrist, without taking it off. "There are things I will tell you one day when you know me better about my family and about Gayan, and about why I said what I said to you on that first night. But not today. Today you have heard enough from cruel men to last a while." Something had shifted between them, some wall gone suddenly thin. Suha almost told him then that his mother's story and her own were the same story with a different man holding the power. She almost told him that the voice in her head still wore her father's face, but had started, lately, to lose some of its volume, and that she thought it was because of the evenings, and the cranes, and him. She said none of it. She was not ready, and neither, she thought, was he. But that night, for the first time, when he rose to leave the sitting room, she found that she did not want him to go, and the wanting frightened her far more than her father ever had. The specialist came on a gray morning 2 weeks later, and he was nothing at all like Dr. Han. Dr. No Sunwoo was young and easy in his own body, and he knelt on the floor of Gaon's room without being asked and without treating it as a sacrifice. He looked at the paper cranes lined along the windowsill, dozens of them now, and instead of writing something in a file, he asked Gaon, quietly, whether the boy might show him how one was folded. He did not require an answer. He simply made the request available and waited, and when Gaon, after a long moment, picked up a sheet of paper and began, Dr. No watched with an attention that Suha recognized, because it was her own. "You did all of this," he said to her afterward in the corridor. It was not a question. Most of what I would spend a year trying to build, you have already built. He smiled at her. Whoever trained you was very good. No one trained me, Suha said. Then you are wasted in this house, he said kindly. And he did not mean it the way it sounded. But Dohan, coming around the corner at that exact moment, heard only the shape of it, a strange man, telling his wife she was wasted here, and something flickered behind his eyes that Suha had never seen there before, and found, to her private and entirely unforgivable delight, that she rather enjoyed. The banquet was the idea of the men around Dohan, who felt that the head of the family had been too long absent from the tables where alliances were kept warm. There would be the Bake family, and two others, and their wives, and it would be expected that the new wife of Ryu Dohan appear on his arm, and be, if not charming, then at the very least not an embarrassment. You do not have to go, Dohan told her. I know, she said. That is why I can. Bike Yenna was seated 3 places down in silver, more beautiful than the last time and twice as careful, and she waited until the plates were being cleared and the room had quieted enough for a single voice to carry before she made her move. I have been meaning to ask, Yenna said, pitched for the whole table. How is the boy? She said the word boy, the way one might say the word tumor. We were all so worried when we heard the new bride had taken charge of him. It seems such a great deal to put on someone with no training, someone from, forgive me, such a different sort of world. She smiled at Suha. I only hope he has not been too much for you. We would all understand if he had. Everyone knows the Ryu family carries a certain, she paused, delicately, weakness. The table waited. This was the part where the bought bride from the shabby suit family would go red and stammer and prove, in front of everyone who mattered, that she did not belong. Suha felt the old cold climb her arms. She felt every eye in the room. She heard her father enjoy it while it lasts, and she heard the voice that had told her all her life that she ruined things, and for one breath she was back at her engagement dinner, producing nothing but silence. And then she thought of Gown holding out the drawing of the half-made bird. And she found that when the person she was protecting was not herself, her voice had never once failed her, and it did not fail her now. The boy's name is gone, Suha said. Her voice was quiet, and it carried to every corner of the room. He is 16 years old. He is not a weakness, and he is not a tumor, and he is not a subject for dinner conversation, and I will not discuss him with people who have decided what he is, without ever once sitting on the floor beside him. She set down her cup, and her hand did not shake at all. You are right that I have no training. What I have is attention. I paid attention to him when the professionals had given up, and do you know what I found? I found that he was never dangerous. He was frightened. There is a difference between those two things, and telling them apart takes a certain kind of person. She looked mildly at Yenna. Most people, no one at the table spoke. Somewhere down its length an older man, the head of one of the other families, made a low sound of amusement into his cup and said only, well, but it was enough, because the room had turned, the way rooms do. Suha did not feel triumphant. She felt mostly as though she might be sick. But underneath that, she felt something she had never felt in a room full of watching people. She felt like herself. Duhan said nothing until much later, in the car, in the dark, with the city sliding past the windows. Then he said, You did not look at me once. I did not need to, she said. I know, he said. That is what I am telling you. At her door that night, he stopped, the way he always stopped, on the wrong side of the threshold, waiting to be told whether he was wanted. He had never once come in without being asked. She understood now what it cost him, and where he had learned it, and what it meant. Suha looked at the most feared man in Seoul, standing in her doorway waiting for permission, and she made for the first time in her whole life a choice that was entirely her own, and about no one's safety but her own happiness. She took a handful of his shirt and pulled him across the threshold and kissed him. He went very still, the way he had gone still on their wedding night, his hands at his sides. "It is all right," she said against his mouth. And only then, carefully, as though she were something that might still tell him to stop and he needed her to know that she could, did he touch her, one hand at her jaw and the other at the small of her back, and the kiss became a thing they were making together rather than a thing either one was taking. When they parted, his forehead rested against hers. "The doctor said you were wasted here," Dohan said. "Are you jealous?" she asked. "Yes," he said, without a trace of shame, and she laughed, and he kissed the laugh out of her, and for a little while, the house with all its locked doors held nothing but the two of them and a boy asleep down the hall with a paper bird in his hand. She did not know that on the other side of the garden wall, in a car parked with its lights off, a man she had never met was writing down the hour the banquet had ended and the name of the woman who had walked in on Ryu Dohan's arm, or that the name was already being carried, that same night, to people who had waited a very long time to find something the untouchable Ryu Dohan could not stand to lose. For a while it was good. Suha would think of those weeks, afterward, as the only stretch of her adult life in which she had not been waiting for something to be taken away. Dayan improved in the way real things improve, which is to say slowly and not in a straight line. He ate at the table now most days. He had begun to write a little, short answers on the notepad he carried everywhere, and once, memorably, a whole sentence complaining that the tea really was too weak, which had made Dohan laugh aloud, a sound so rare that Sunja had come to the door to see what was the matter. Dr. No came twice a week and mostly, he admitted, watched Suha work. Dohan stayed. In the evenings. He stayed some of the nights. Now he learned the geography of her small fears and moved through it carefully. She learned that under the stillness, he was a person of great and carefully governed feeling, and that the governing was not coldness, but its opposite, a man holding a full cup, very level, because he had once seen what happened. Then, in the middle of a night in early spring, the storm came. She woke to thunder, and to the sound she had not heard since her first night in the house. The wordless screaming, rolling down the east corridor. Dohan was already gone from beside her, moving before he was fully awake, and she followed him. And they reached Gaon's door together. The boy was in the corner again, the old corner, knees to his chest and hands clamped over his ears, and every crack of thunder drove him harder into the wall, as though he might push himself through it and out of the world, entirely. Two of the night guards stood helpless in the doorway. Dohan waved them out. He tried at first, the old way, his way, the command. "Jian," he said, low and certain, the voice that moved men up and down the harbor. "You are safe." But the boy did not hear the words. He heard only that the room now held another loud and urgent sound, and his breathing climbed. "He cannot hear you," Suha said quietly. "Not while you sound like the thing he is afraid of." She touched Dohan's arm. "Come down here with me, and do not reach for him." Not yet. No one told Ryu Dohan to get down on the floor. She watched the instinct to refuse move through him. The whole architecture of a man who had survived by never lowering himself in front of anyone. Then he looked at his brother, and he lowered himself to the floor beside her, and she loved him for it, so suddenly, and so completely, that it frightened her. They did not go to the boy. They sat a full body's length away, the two of them, and Suha began, on purpose to breathe slowly and deeply, loudly enough to be heard beneath the thunder, in and out. And after a moment Dohan understood and matched her, in and out, two calm creatures in a room with a frightened one, showing him with nothing but their own bodies, that there was no danger here, that no one was braced to run or to strike, that the loud thing in the sky could not reach him where he was. It took a long time. But the boy's breathing, by slow degrees, began to fall into step with theirs. The screaming became crying, and the crying became shaking, and the shaking, at the last, became stillness. And near the very end of it, Gaon uncurled, far enough to reach out and take hold, not of Suha's hand this time, but of his brother's, and Ryu Dohan made a small broken sound, and held on as though he had been waiting 10 years to be allowed to. They stayed on the floor a long while after the boy had fallen asleep. The rain went on against the windows. He was 6. Dohan said finally, into the dark, when it happened. I was 18. Suha said nothing. She had learned that the way to keep a door open is to not stand in it. Our mother was married into this family the way you were married into it, he said. Bought and delivered and told to be grateful. My father was not a kind man. There was no wedding night on which he told her that she could tell him to stop. He turned the ring on the smallest finger of his hand, a ring Suha had not known he wore. She endured it for a long time, for our sake, far longer than she should have. And then one night she decided that she would not endure it any longer, and she tried to leave, and she meant to take the 2 of us with her. He was quiet for a moment. My father's men were at the gate. I was away at school. By the time I reached home she was gone, and Gon was sitting on the floor of the front hall beside her. And he was 6 years old, and he had been there for all of it, and he has not spoken a single word from that day to this one. The rain filled the silence he left behind. I swore 2 things. That year, Dohan said. That I would take everything my father had, and everything he was, and I would use it to make certain that no one ever did to my brother what had been done to our mother. And that I would never, for as long as I lived, be a man who took a woman who had not been asked. He looked at her in the dark. I did not expect, when they delivered me a wife to settle a debt, to have the second promise tested on the very first night, nor to find that keeping it was the easiest thing I have ever done. Suha reached across the small space between them and took his hand, the one that wore his mother's ring, and held it. She fell asleep like that, on the floor of the boys' room, her hand inside her husband's, and for the space of that one night, the house held nothing that could hurt any of them. It did not last past morning. She woke to an empty space beside her, and found Dohan in his study with Jagal, and both men went silent when she came in the particular way men go silent around a thing they have decided is not hers to carry. On the desk between them lay a photograph. She crossed the room before either could stop her and looked down at it. It was a picture of her, taken through the garden wall, from outside, with a long lens. She was sitting on the camellia bench, with Gaon beside her, the boy's head nearly on her shoulder, both of them entirely unaware. Across the bottom, in a stranger's hand, someone had written, "The great Ryu Dohan has found something soft at last." What a shame it would be. The sentence stopped there. It did not need to finish. Suha looked up and saw, in her husband's face, the exact moment the man she had spent a whole season teaching to leave doors open began out of pure terror to reach for every lock in the house. By nightfall the house had become a fortress, and Suha had become a prisoner inside it, though her husband would have died before he used that word. It happened quickly, and it happened the way these things always happen, one reasonable step at a time. First, the guards were doubled. Then she was asked for her own safety not to go into the garden. Then the garden door was locked. Then she came back from sitting with Gaon to find that her things had been moved without a word to her, out of her own room and into a windowless suite at the center of the house, the safest room, Dohan said. The room farthest from any wall an enemy could reach across. Her books had been set on new shelves. Her cranes had been carried there and arranged on a table by someone who had been trying to be kind. The jar, where she kept the small money she had begun to earn, stood beside an expensive vase. It was all there. All of her, reproduced from the outside by a man who had studied her very carefully, and not one piece of it was hers, because she had not chosen a single part of it. Dohan was waiting for her. "You will stay here until it is dealt with," he said. "It will not take long. I have men on it already. No one will reach you in this room." He said it the way he said everything he had decided, as a thing already finished. Suha stood in the doorway of the beautiful safe room that had been built around her without her knowledge, and she felt something she had not felt since the afternoon her father told her she was to be married. She felt the walls of a decision that somebody else had made about her life closing. "You moved my things," she said, "to keep you safe." "You moved my things," she said again, "and did not ask me, and did not tell me. And I came back and found my whole life picked up and set down in a place a man had decided was better for me." She was not shouting. Her voice was terribly quiet and terribly steady, the voice she used with frightened creatures, except that the creature she was steadying now was herself. "Do you know who else used to do exactly that?" "Do not," he said. His face had gone hard. "My father took my keys," she said, "for my own good. He cancelled the things I had planned, because he always knew better. He told everyone that I was too anxious, too clumsy, too much, to be trusted with my own choices, and every single time, he swore, it was to protect me." She took a breath. "And your father built a house your mother could not leave, and told her it was because the world outside the walls was dangerous, and I am certain, I am completely certain, that some part of him believed it." "That is not the same," Johan said, and there was something desperate underneath the anger. "Now it is exactly the same," Suha said. "You watched me leave doors open for your brother for a whole season. You knelt on the floor beside me and you learned how. And the very first time you were frightened, you took every choice I had, and you locked it inside a room, and you called it love." She shook her head slowly. "A cage is a cage, Johan, even when the man who builds it is weeping while he turns the key." He was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had changed. "Where you will even go," he said. "You have no money." He heard himself and stopped, appalled, because it was his father's own argument. "The world is dangerous, and you cannot manage it without me," but it was already out in the room. "And gown," he said. And this was worse. This was the very thing he had sworn he would never do. "Gown needs you. You cannot simply stop." The word landed in the room like a struck bell. It was his word, from the wedding night, handed back to him, and it stopped him as completely as it had once set her free. "You told me on our first night that a marriage which begins by taking is only a longer word for the thing my father did to me," Suha said. Her eyes were full, but her voice did not break. "Do not become the thing you warned me about, and do not, ever, use that boy as a rope. You told me yourself what a rope did to your mother. I have watched you refuse, again and again, to turn his love into a leash. Do not start now, with me, or you will lose the one thing about yourself that was never for sale." Johan looked as though she had struck him. The anger drained out of his face and left behind something much younger and much worse. "You are right," he said. His voice was barely a voice at all. "I am sorry. I did the thing I always do. I saw a danger, and I removed everyone's choice from the room, because that is how I have kept the people I love alive." He closed his eyes, and I did not even feel myself doing it. "I know," she said, more gently. "That is what makes it so dangerous. I can protect you," he said. "Not like this," she said. She told him that night that she was leaving. Every instinct in him fought it, and she watched him win the fight against each of those instincts one at a time, which was, she thought, the most he had ever loved her, and the most alone she had ever felt, both in the same moment. He offered her a car, a driver, men to watch the building, wherever the building turned out to be. She refused all of it, gently, because she understood at last that safety handed to her by someone else, on terms she had not set, was the precise shape of the trap she was walking out of, and she would rather be frightened and free than safe inside another man's decision. He argued. Then he stopped arguing, which cost him more than the argument had, and let her refuse. At the door she stopped. She wanted, badly, to go to Gon, to explain. to tell the boy that she was not leaving him, that grown people sometimes had to go away in order to keep from becoming the wrong kind of grown person, that she would come back. But she knew that if she woke him, if she saw his face, she would not be able to do the thing she had to do. And she knew, too, that to wake the boy in order to make her own leaving easier would be to use him exactly as she had just forbidden Dohan to use him. So she left the paper crane instead, the first one, the one from the very first day, which she had carried in her pocket, through everything. She set it on the table in the front hall, where the boy would find it in the morning. It was not enough. Nothing would have been enough. But it was hers to give, and she gave it, and then she walked out of the house of locked doors into the cold spring dark, and she did not look back because she was not certain she could survive it, if she did. The room above the little paper shop in the old quarter was small enough that she could touch two walls at once, and it was cold, and the stairs complained under any weight at all, and it was, in every particular, hers. Suha had taken it with the small money from the jar, the money she had earned, and she had refused, through the old man who ran the shop below, the several increasingly large sums that arrived in the first week from a source no one would name. She knew who they were from. She sent every one of them back, not out of anger. She was past anger. She sent them back because she was building something at last that no one could ever afterwards say they had paid for. Dr. No Sunwoo found her, because of course he did, and offered her honest work, assisting him with the frightened ones. The children who would not speak, and the old people who had stopped speaking, and the ones everyone else had labeled difficult when the truth was only that they were afraid. He offered to sign her hours toward a real qualification. You have the thing that cannot be taught, he told her. We can add the things that can. She said yes. She was good at it. She had always been good at it. The only new thing was that now, for the first time in her life, she was good at it in the daylight, where people could see her do it, and her hands did not shake, and her voice, when she explained to a mother why her silent son was not broken, did not once fail her. She thought of Dohan constantly. She did not go back. Both of these things were true at the same time, and she was learning, slowly, to let them both be true. He sent one message, in the second week. It said, I have thought about everything you told me, and you were right about all of it. I became him, in a single night. And I did not feel it happen, and that frightens me, more than any enemy ever has. Your things are back in your own room, where they belong. The danger has been dealt with, and I dealt with it the way you would have wanted, which is to say, without doing to another family what was very nearly done to mine. You will not hear from me again unless you choose it. I hope you are building the thing that no one can say they paid for. Then, at the very end, not as pressure, only as a fact, he added, he is not eating well. I am not telling you this to bring you back. I am telling you because you would want to know and because I have decided to stop deciding what you are permitted to know. She read it many times. She did not answer it. But she stopped, after that, sending back his honesty, because honesty was not a payment, and it did not arrive with a rope tied to it. What she did not know, because he did not tell her, was that Ryu Dohan spent his nights that spring, sitting on the floor outside his brother's door. Gaeon had stopped writing on the notepad. He had gone back to the corner. But he had not screamed. Not once, which the new doctor said was significant. Though no one could say significant of what. He kept the first paper crane, the one from the front hall, closed inside his fist, and he would not be parted from it. And every evening, at dusk, he went and stood at the window of the east wing and looked down the hill toward the city, toward the old quarter, though he had no way of knowing she was there. And Dohan, watching him do it, understood exactly how the boy felt, and said nothing, because to say it, to send that image down the hill to her, would have been to make his brother's grief into the leash he had promised never in his life to hold. It went on like that for nearly a month. She built her days. He kept his word. The boy stood at his window at dusk. And then, on a night at the very end of spring, another storm came in off the water, the first real one since the night the three of them had spent together on the floor. And it rolled up the hill toward the house with all its thunder, and somewhere in the old quarter, Suha lay awake listening to it and thinking, without wanting to, of a boy in a corner, with his hands pressed over his ears, and wondering who was sitting on the floor beside him now. She did not know that at that very hour, in the house of locked doors, a window in the east wing stood open to the rain, and the room behind it was empty, and the first paper crane, the one he had guarded in his fist for a month, had gone from the sill where it always sat, because its owner had closed it once more inside his hand and climbed out into the storm and begun on foot, in the dark, terrified of every open inch of the world, to make his way down the hill toward the only person who had ever made the noise inside his head go quiet. She heard the knock at nearly 1 in the morning, over the noise of the storm, and her whole body knew before her mind did, the way it had once known in a different house on a very different night. She opened the door at the top of the narrow stairs and found Ryu Gaon. He was soaked to the skin and shaking, and his hands were scraped raw, where he had climbed something he never should have climbed, and his shoes were ruined, and he had walked. She would learn most of the way across the city in the dark and the rain, a boy who had not set foot beyond the gate in 10 years. And he stood on her threshold streaming water, and looked at her with his brother's exact eyes, and held out in his scraped and trembling hand the first paper crane. Suha went down to her knees in the doorway. "Oh," she said. "Oh, you brave, foolish, wonderful boy." She could not finish any of it. She pulled him in out of the rain and wrapped him in every towel and blanket the small room owned, and she did not scold him, because there is no scolding a thing like this. A journey like this, made by a boy who had walked the whole length of his terror to bring a woman back a paper bird. The headlights came up the narrow lane 20 minutes later. She heard him on the stairs, and then he was in the doorway, the rain gone black in his hair, and he looked first, and only, at his brother, confirming with his eyes that the boy was alive and warm and safe, and the sound he made when he saw that it was so would stay with her for the rest of her life. Then he looked at her, and he did not come in. He stood on the wrong side of the threshold, the powerful man, water gathering at his feet, and he waited, and she understood that he had driven across a whole city, not knowing whether his brother was alive or dead, and that even now, even like this, he would not cross a doorway he had not been invited through, because it was the last thing he had left to give her, the proof that he had heard her, that he would rather stand in the rain until morning than take one single thing more that she had not offered. He followed the crane. Dohan said. His voice was wrecked. He climbed out of a window in a storm, and he walked half the night across the city in the dark, and I have never in my life been so afraid or so. He stopped. I did not use him to reach you. I need you to know that. I did not send him. I would have gone to my grave without sending him. I know, she said. He came on his own. I am not going to ask you to come back, Dohan said. I lost the right to ask you for anything the night I moved your whole life into a room with no name on the door. I came for him. He looked at the boy bundled in her blankets. And to tell you, one time, with no rope tied to it, that I know exactly what I did, and that I have spent every night since, trying to learn how to be a man who leaves the door open even when he is frightened. Especially when he is frightened, because you were right. The frightened times are the only times it ever counts. He stepped back, out into the rain, giving her the whole of the doorway. That is all. I will take him home if you tell me to. Or, I will stand here until you tell me to stop. And there it was. The whole of it, folded down into 4 words, and handed back to her across a threshold, the way she had taught him to hand things across. Set down, stepped back from, hers to pick up or to leave. Suha looked at the boy who had crossed a city for her, and at the man standing in the rain who had learned at a terrible price how not to become his father, and she felt the last of her own father's voice go quiet inside her. Not with a fight, just quietly. The way a sound stops when you finally walk out of the room it has been living in. "Come in," she said. He wiped his shoes on the mat, though it was hopeless in that rain, and he came in, and he sat on the floor of the tiny room because there was nowhere else to sit, and the three of them sat together in the warm papery smell of the shop below while the storm spent itself out over the roofs. It was Gown who broke the quiet. He had been watching the two of them, his brother and the woman, in the small warm room, and at some point he shifted and reached out and pressed the paper crane into Suha's hand and folded her fingers closed around it, keeping it there this time. And then he opened his mouth, and in a voice rusted from 10 years of silence, cracked and small and unbearably careful, he said one word: "Stay." The room stopped. Dohan made a sound as though something had torn open in his chest that had been sealed shut since he was 18 years old. He reached for his brother and stopped himself. The old habit and Gown, seeing him stop, reached the rest of the way himself and took his brother's hand and said it again to both of them now, the first and only word he had chosen to give the world in 10 years. "Stay." Suha was crying and did not care that she was. She looked at the boy who had found his voice and understood that he had spent it on the one single thing he wanted, the way she had once spent hers, and she thought that of everything she had ever taught this broken and unbroken family, this was the only lesson that had ever truly mattered. That a voice is not for the people who demand it from you, it is for the things you choose to say to the people you have chosen to keep. Later, much later, when the storm had passed, and the boy slept between them, and the first gray light was coming up over the old quarter, Dohan turned his head on the floor and looked at her. "Tell me to stop," he said, very quietly, and she understood that he was giving it back to her one last time, the whole of it, all the power folded up inside it, laying it down between them and stepping back. She thought about the wedding night, and the room she had walked into expecting to be taken, and the man who had refused to take. She thought about all the people who had spent her whole life deciding it for her, and the one who never once would. She reached out and laid her hand flat against his chest, the way she had taught him to lay his own hand against fear, and she felt his heart going hard beneath her palm, waiting. "No," she said, "stay." And the most feared man in Seoul, who had married her to settle a debt and had spent a year learning that the only things ever worth having are the ones that are freely given, closed his eyes and stayed.